Now, to start our next panel, we have a panel on AgTech with somebody who I've been to many of his conferences, Roger Royse, who is a partner at Haynes and Boone. I've been a big fan of Roger's for many, many years, and I think they are one of the most important law firms dealing with AgTech in Silicon Valley. And the conference that they run is great and full of chock full of insights. So I'd like to welcome Roger and his AgTech Roundtable. Take it away, Roger.
Okay, thanks very much. Give me a second here. Can you see me okay?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay, there we go. Okay, thank you very much. So thanks for being here. Thanks for hosting this conference. I've been sitting in on the sessions and watching some of the presentations. It's been really educational and really fascinating. As you know, we've done several panels and presentations now on the role of food and agriculture and health tech. And what we've done here today now is assembled a handful of our speakers and presenters that I know very well for many years, have been very active in the space for our roundtable discussion. Not a moderated panel, so that means I get to have an opinion this time around, but a roundtable discussion on AgTech, and I think consistent with the theme of of this conference, I think we maybe ought to focus on the health side of it. So one of the things that I got out of this that I hadn't really focused on that much before is just the importance of food in health. And that sounds kind of simple, but it's not what I've been thinking of. I heard F. Lindenbaum many years ago kind of school me on how the United States kind of ramped up production, during right after World War II to feed the world, and health was not the biggest issue. It was keeping people from starving and making our farmers wealthy, and there'd been some adverse effects of that. And I never forget that. And now we're seeing that. I think now we're kind of seeing the trend change with the rise of consumerism, and I blame the millennials for most things, and I blame them for being very concerned about where their food comes from and what it's like. So I'd like to just throw that out to get things started. Just the role of consumers, what consumers want, why it's important that food be healthy now, and how that's happening, because we've certainly seen it in the kind of companies that I'm seeing come through my office now. So any comments from anybody? By the way, sorry, we should introduce ourselves. My bad. I'm Roger Royse, partner with Haynes and Boone. I also started a little thing we call the Silicon Valley AgTech Conference about 8 years ago. Due to COVID, we didn't have it this year, but we'll be back next year. Roaring strong. We had an incubator for a year. That was a lot of fun. I'm not going to do that again. And since then, I try to just keep my hand in things, mostly for my own education, by participating in programs like this. F, why don't you go ahead? You're next to me on my screen.
Sure, thank you, Roger. I'm Ephraim Lindenbaum, Managing Director of Advanced Ventures here in Silicon Valley. We're a 1999 vintage maiden fund, now invested through 3 successive funds and currently investing out of our managed co-fund since 2016. We've been investors in this particular category of AgTech since 2000, which makes us one of the oldest institutional AgTech investors. We've been very lucky over the years to have exits in both the AgTech and food tech, as well as the broader health tech category. And particularly, we're very excited now, over 70% of our portfolio is what we consider the health and wellness category. We just had a major exit on the digital health side and telehealth at the end of last year. And on the ag and food side, 4 of our companies that we invested in the single-digit millions are now in the $100 million range. All of them have a very, very meaningful effect on both the ag tech, food tech, and the health and wellness space attached to that.
Rob, you're next to me on the screen.
I'm Rob Trice, and I'm with Better Food Ventures. We look at the application of information technology to food and agriculture, and I'm pleased to be joined with my colleague Seana, who is also on this panel. So we specifically, as I said, we focus on information technology and looking really at how we can apply information technology from seed to stomach, so throughout the supply chain, from seed to soil to supply chain to store to supper to stomach, And, Roger, as you're discussing, that relationship between agriculture and food is one, and health is one that we definitely need to be increasing. And I'll stop there for now.
I'll go next, perhaps. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, hi.
Yeah, we hear you.
I'm Jaleh Daie, and I'm partner at Aurora Equity and chairman of the Food and AgTech at the Band of Angels. I've been investing actually in AgTech, food tech for the last 20 years. It used to be called biotech, nutraceuticals, cosmeceuticals, this and that. But since 2013, we now call it food tech and AgTech. So I've been at it for 20 years now.
Okay, thank you, Jaleh. Hey, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. Aaron Magenheim, CEO and founder of AgTech Insight. We have a global team of experts, all kind of from the food and ag background, and we help companies and organizations through implementation of their ag tech and just innovation across food and agriculture as well, just focused on the implementation side. Also recently started Growers Insight, really focused on helping farmers better utilize the tools available, and just today announced a joint venture starting Growers Insight Argentina. So doing quite a bit more work in Latin America. So thanks for having me.
And Seana.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. Seana Daie, partner with Better Food Ventures, and Rob gave a great overview of what we do. So I'll just add to that and say that my real area of focus is ag technology, in-field technology, and post-harvest from the farm gate through the supply chain, kind of looking at those IT innovation opportunities and entrepreneurs who are focused on that part of the market. So thanks for inviting me today.
So what do you all think about my hypothesis here that the consumers have changed and they're demanding, they're more concerned about their health. They want to know what's in their food. And that's been, I just see it in my practice, the kinds of companies that are coming through now. I do a lot of benefit corporations, by the way, because they want to save the world as much as they want to make money. And one way they save the world is by making everybody healthier, and consumers seem to want that now. Am I unique in seeing that, or do you think that's a real trend?
Well,
I think it's a real trend. Actually, it's something that COVID-19 accelerated. The health awareness, I think, is at an all-time high in modern history, actually, at least minimally. And that the fact that almost 60-70% of people are either afflicted with metabolic problems or borderline getting into it is part of it, that we are so conscious about what we eat. And in fact, I saw something recently. For the first time in the last 40 years, the total blood sugar levels have come down, basically. So we are we got the peak diabetes, hopefully, maybe.
Yeah, and I can add to that and really speak to it from a true venture capital portfolio company perspective. So we have a number of companies in the category, and I think the best way, looking at it from an F50 perspective and an investor perspective, is to see how our companies or our colleagues' companies are really performing in the space. I've got a great example in one of our companies, Mycotechnology. They're an advanced protein company. They were formed a number of years ago today. And just to give you an idea, when they really pioneered some of their fermented protein technology, which has really turned out to be a very broad and deep-reaching tool, it was really put off by consumers. Today, that technology is going into JBS, the largest meat company. You can buy it in Kellogg Kashi bars, at Maple Foods, one of the largest North American meat companies, as well as Rich Foods, one of the largest dairy companies. All of those companies are utilizing what amounts to plant-based proteins that's fermented and has an amino acid profile that is comparable to a meat product. And consumers are demanding that. Now that has really kind of come up from the consumer side and is now driving very, very deep into the whole global food chain. So when you have the largest global meat company buying plant-based protein from the most innovative plant protein company in the world, that tells you where that's at. And then on the CPG side, which is really where the rubber meets the road on the consumer side, we have a company called Alpha Foods. Alpha Foods is a great company. They have a number of SKUs on the plant-based side. I'm sure everybody's heard of Beyond Meat, etc. But when you look at the broader element, that in their case, they have multiple SKUs, not just meat replacement, but everything from burritos to pizzas, etc. And they are now in 7,800 retail locations. Walmart sells them right next to Jimmy Dean's sausage breakfast burritos, and they're getting a 40% pull through when they're comparing that. So the consumer themselves are making the choice whether they can have a high caloric, terrible meat-based, breakfast burrito, or they can have a plant-based healthy one. They're making that choice.
Maybe I'll weigh in a little bit, just kind of setting the stage on more of a global perspective, like Jaleh was doing. If you look at diet-related disease, it's the single biggest contributor to global mortality. And you look at the fact that obviously we have obesity and overweight. You have some South Pacific islands where the population, maybe 90%, might be obese or overweight. On the other extreme, we obviously have hunger, but we also have stunting that affects kids physically, but then also mentally. This is an issue even here. We're sitting here in California, and even in California, stunting from lack of nutrition and poor diet is an issue. And so we often think that this is something that is an issue that's gone away, is an issue that is being solved, but it's just the opposite. And I think one of the key challenges that we have in food tech and ag tech is the ability to really focus on how we can deal with this global challenge and get consumers not to eat the cheapest and most convenient foods. And I'm going to tee up Seana a little bit. So, Seana just wrote a great piece in Forbes, actually talking about the fact that our post-World War II food system is doing exactly what we designed it to do, which is supply as many calories as cheaply as possible. But that's not meeting the needs of society today. And as Af is mentioning, we need to have better nutrition. If you look at the nutritional content of an American orange, you need to eat 8 oranges to get the same nutritional value that you would have gotten from 1 orange in the 1960s. So we've not valued nutrition either as an industry or as consumers by and large. And so what we really need to do is really switch our food production system from more of a supply driven to more of a demand driven to meet those consumer needs. And Seana, you want to talk more about the piece that you wrote?
Yeah, and I think, part of this is just a recognition that prior to 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, you didn't have the consumers sort of demanding this level of information and understanding of where their food is coming from and how their food is grown. And I think, I think the ag industry, the food and ag industry, are trying to catch up to that, but there are still very much kind of disconnects between where the consumer is and what the industry is sort of prepared to provide in terms of information. Ag tech adoption in and of itself is still kind of in the very early days. It's coming along, but that ability to trace and verify ingredients and how crops are grown is still in the very early days. So I think we have to recognize that the consumer is very much leading this charge, and the industry is trying to, figure out how to quickly and cost effectively and sort of within their workflows, meet the demands of that consumer.
So Roger, you like to blame it on millennials. I'll add to that is social media, I think, is the #1 culprit. It allows consumers to voice what they're looking for in a larger scale and get that information back to to the locations that they're buying food or eating at. And I think that tied with more information, being spread. Those two things together is kind of why we're at the place that we are and why it's so important. But as I travel, I see this firsthand of you're in cities with younger people, and huge percentages of them are overweight, and you get out into other areas where they don't have as much fast food, and they're eating more of a traditional diet, and people are not so heavy and seem to be in better shape. So I think it's twofold. If the consumers are talking to us as food and ag what they're looking for, there's also great opportunity that I think we're, especially through this COVID, has been great opportunity, but I think we are not taking advantage of sharing our story in food and ag of what we're doing and kind of connecting those dots as well as we should.
I'm kind of interested in something Seana said about the technology aspect of this, and how consumers are going to want to know things about their food, and technology can provide that data, with sensors, etc. But I'm really worried about just the companies that I work with, because they've always depended on farmers having enough disposable money to gamble on their products. And what's been going on, Aaron, yeah, you're laughing because you know what I mean about that. And these last couple of years have been pretty tough for farmers, haven't they? And it looks like 2020 is not going to be a picnic either, for ranchers either, especially. So I just, I have a worry that this is going to be a tough year for ag tech just because of what's going on in the economy. Are you guys seeing that out there in your companies? Anybody?
Certainly, yeah. So certainly we are seeing that. There's sectors that are incredibly soft. I mean, some of the data suggesting that the small and medium-sized family farm may be looking at about a 30% bankruptcy ratio. That could get higher than that during the course of this year. However, driving this a little bit more back to the investor's perspective, I think we've worked hard over the years to really be careful to stay out of the areas that are kind of the nice to have versus the must have. And farmers have been the innovators since the beginning of time. They also operate on some of the thinnest margins with the highest risk profile of just about any other business. So you really have to drive innovation that makes sense to them, both on an economic and a utilization side. So I think one of the things we've tried to do is drive into areas like, for example, seed science, decontamination technologies, areas where those enable a farmer, regardless on the market conditions, to really need and want to spend the money there. If you can provide a higher quality seed with a higher yield ratio, for example, if you can provide a better or more beneficial trait profile to that seed, that's certainly very interesting. If you're able to decontaminate a crop that may have had microbial or pathogenic contamination and save that crop, to a farmer, this is something that's it's a no-brainer spend. So this moves from the nice to have factor to the must have factor. And I think, coming out of a technology investment side, I mean, this is a broad thesis that I think investors have had for years. It's the nice to have versus must have technology. And so from that standpoint, as you drive in, driving ag tech or food tech innovation, really has to come at it from the farmer side. And you have to give them tools that are beneficial both in up and down markets, because it's a very cyclical business. Farming is very much a finance story today in a mid-sized farm. And the economics are very, very challenging. So being able to, bring in the new hip Silicon Valley thing sounds very exciting outside of the farm belt. But, when we look at it here, you have to deliver products that have immediate ROI to them. And even in a down market, we're still seeing success in that.
Hey,
Roger, I think part of the, while you're correct about farmers being in between a rock and a hard spot, that's correct. But much of this conclusion is based on current business models. But one of the trends that I'm seeing, as it's just a little bit moving in that direction, is changing the business model. You hear about talk of farming as a contract, farming as a service. So I think I think these things, we need to
But
pay more
that's
attention to
it,
business models.
most of the farming in this country today is farming as a service or contract farming. I mean, most of the major farming that's done in the United States is under contract from Bunge or Cargill or one of the other global companies, at an industrial farming scale today. So that is very much the standard out there. It really is an issue of being able to drive, higher margins to the farmer to give them the breathing room to survive some of the more challenging impacts in the space we found.
Well, you're right. Farming as a contract happens with very large companies like Bunge and those companies. But I was trying to say that sort of thing is going to creep into the mid-sized farms and hopefully in the smaller farms as well.
Yeah, I think also, as an investor looking at this space, really, again, in recognizing where the realities are, if you're looking at technology investments and that kind of market adoption curve, we're still very much lacking the basic connectivity, the common operating systems, the standardization to get a lot of this really exciting technology that we see kind of entrepreneurs focused on and excited about. It's going to take time because we still have some of these basic fundamental infrastructure challenges in the field. And I think if you're an investor, you've got to recognize that. It's not to say that these companies might not have a great vision and a great product, but the timeline to adoption is really going to be, most likely longer than they expect it to be. And certainly you as an investor, might have the bandwidth for.
That's a great point, Sean. I mean, I think at the end of the day, this whole boom in ag tech hasn't been really aligned well with the farmers and the technology in the field. And I think that's been a real challenge. I mean, we've seen a significant amount of collapse within the pure play ag tech and food tech funds over the last couple of years. And I think a lot of that comes down to precisely what Sean is mentioning, which is understanding, what tech is available from a farm side and also being able to really orient those investments around elements that are going to add value either in the food or the farm supply chain, to be able to drive that, in venture scale investment. And I think that's really been a huge disconnect within the ag and food space, especially it applies to health. There's some kind of a convergence where, some of the impact funds, which are trying to make meaningful social change versus, true ag and food funds, which are trying to drive investor return. And, that sort of, blend there is a very, very challenging model when we're still operating as investors in a traditional fund cycle, right? So, when we're deploying institutional capital, we have to drive those returns over, a max of 10 years, if not much, much sooner. So, from our standpoint, we've really tried to work very hard to stay out of the, really gee whiz tech that, to Shauna's point, has a really hard time integrating into the farm reality. And then moving into things that, you can sit with a farmer and say, okay, that plugs a hole in their existing chain. And that's how, technology as a whole can make it a broader impact in the farm and food space today.
And Roger, just getting that point, if you actually look at what we've done is we've divided ag tech into farm tech and food supply chain tech. And we think that, a term that Shauna uses is called the messy middle of food. And so I think F is hitting that theme of like, let's look at the ag tech, and a lot of the focus in ag tech up to now has been focused in field up to the farm gate. There's a lot more need right now. There's a lot of pain, but from the farm gate to retail in that messy middle of food. And I think COVID bared that out, where we had a lot of supply, but we didn't have the ability to take that food and get it to the right people at the right time. I think one other thing just to keep in mind, just a final thing on farm tech is, a lot of the early ag tech has been focused on, or farm tech has been focused on maximizing yield. But right now, that's a problem. We have too much yield in some commodities like corn, soy, milk, and that's causing commodity prices to come down, which of course comes back to bite the farmer. So rather than focusing just on maximizing yield, how can we look at maximizing cash flow and profitability?
I think that that's exactly where we need to focus on, when we work on the implementation side, there is no, to me, there is no must have versus nice to have. If you think that something's a nice to have, then you haven't figured out what the value proposition for that technology is. Every farmer, every organization has, I've had it explained to me, they have $100 million problems, they have $10 million problems, they have $1 million problems. And you can look at two organizations that you think are same size farmers, growing same crops, and they will have significantly different problems that fall into each one of those categories. And so that's why when we look at these technologies, most of them have a place that they will fit into an organization, but when do they fit? What problem are they solving? So those, it's really the implementation, the execution, and the collaboration side of ag tech that needs a focus today.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Aaron. I got to ask some more topical questions because I've been hearing a lot of people. We'll go back to, maybe this is social media, but I've been hearing a lot of people blaming COVID on just the way our food is processed, and they say this is just the start of a whole new era of pandemics because what happened in China and Southeast Asia and the wet markets. Not so different here in the, it's a little different here in the U.S., but you still have the conditions for really unhealthy, not only unhealthy food that we've been talking about, but for possible diseases, new and different strains of diseases. And I'm wondering, is there a technology solution to that health problem? And is that a health problem?
So we have. Yeah, well, we have a company called Pathogen DX. They're one of the leaders in food and ag testing. They're testing for a very broad base of pathogenic microbial contamination in the food chain, high-speed testing, which has really been one of the big problems. Is typically you've looked at slow, old-scale plate-based solutions. It's a 3 to 7 day turn on being able to get pathogenic and microbial contamination data back. That's why you always hear about these outbreaks, predominantly in the leafy green side of the ag space. That's moved into viral testing as well. The capacity to go into some levels of viral testing. However, for the most part, I think you're kind of getting deeper into some of the theoretical aspects of the microbiome there. As an investor, I think, we view that as very interesting. We do tend to play on the animal health side there and really operating on the microbiome side to reduce antibiotics in the traditional animal protein supply chain. So, I think what we viewed is, you can chip away at making these really meaningful, changes in the food chain by finding these niches and then digging in there. And, one of these elements you're mentioning is the antibiotic use in the animal protein side of this, and really being able to attack that as both an economic problem as well as a health problem.
So what I see, I think you have to kind of split this up into a couple different sectors, and people that haven't traveled to developing countries and walk through dozens of wet markets like I have, don't understand or appreciate what actually happens in some of those places. It's actually amazing to see. I've eaten food from wet markets hundreds of times in multiple different places of the country, and typically that animal, that product is really it's fresh. It's within a day old or sooner, whereas the products that we have in our long supply chain here are a week, 2 weeks, or months old, sitting in a freezer. And so there needs to be there needs to be kind of a balance between those two. As developing countries, people move to cities, they're having challenges building a newer supply chain to meet the demands. But you also have to look at how you're going to cater to that population, because every time you start adding testing and different things, it's more costs. So I think technology can help connect people quicker, and connect buyers to sellers quicker, and provide us more information. And but you also have to look at you're not going to be doing pathogen testing in a wet market. So that's a completely different problem than we have, when we're looking at, stuff that we get from Costco in the States. So tech definitely has a role to play, but you have to come at these things from significantly different angles.
On that, I can't remember who was on the panel for synthetic bio. I know F was, but I want to talk a little bit about that because I was kind of skeptical, to be honest with you. I'm a little afraid of alternative proteins. I'm not sure, and I'm willing to try stuff, but I'm not sure that that's so healthy. And somebody made I know it was Erica, who's not here. She made the comment that nobody said that alternative protein had to be healthy. It's highly processed.
Well, I will. So let's talk about alternative protein. I mean, in the case of most alternative proteins, as we look at it today, those are actually natural proteins. In the case of, our company, which uses fermented protein, that's actually, a microbial base. So that's actually just mushrooms at the end of the day, and it's done in liquid tissue culture. So, there's very little of the alternative protein market that has any meaningful size outside of some unique human health elements that isn't really, natural. Most of the alternative protein out there today is really yellow pea, soy, hemp. We have companies that operate on both the hemp protein side as well as, certainly the fermented biological side. When you get into true synth bioprotein, other than the quote unquote manufacturing of meat, folks like Memphis, Uma's company, really most of it is only in very unique cases. The cost per gram is just so far beyond anything that's at a retail level. There are some medical proteins, in replacements for, mother's milk, for example, that DSM makes in that particular case. It's truly synthetic. But, really otherwise, those are all really science projects today. There's very little that's actually in the market that doesn't ultimately have a naturally derived source.
Though, if I heard
As a scientist, I want to add my 2 cents here. I used to be academic research scientist, so I think it's always good to have a healthy dose of skepticism. I eat plant-based proteins. I really like the Impossible Burgers flavor and texture and all of that. So I'm not against plant-based protein, but I do remember when I was a young punk graduate student, or maybe undergraduate, I forget, so long ago, that USDA came up with the food pyramid. At the bottom was carbohydrates, and what we ended up with was diabetics. I'm not saying that plant-based protein is going to have the same problem, but as a scientist, my core basis is be skeptical about everything. Just don't jump with your 2 feet right away. Just know what it is that is out there. So I think it's okay to be skeptical. We need to be skeptical so we can keep on the science of it.
But Jaleh, I heard you say twice now that we should eat food, and you said by that you meant we should eat real food, not processed food, if we can.
Right. I didn't say it. Michael Pollan said it.
Yeah.
He said in his book, Omnivore's Dilemma, he says, eat food, not too much, mostly plant. And I really stick to it. I eat everything, a little bit of everything, mostly plant, lots of salads. And I think it's a good philosophy from my perspective.
Rob, you were one of the first investors in the space that I know, so I know that you've done your homework on this. So tell me, am I raising a concern that I shouldn't be?
Well,
I think we should ask everything, and we should debate everything.
I think Roger, you do. I mean, there is concern, and there should be concern, to Jaleh's point, but it's still early, and we got a long way to go on this. Again, we're more focused on investing in information technology for food and agriculture. One of the cool things is the underlying platforms that are helping us to identify different metabolomic properties, for instance, into different foods and ingredients, so that we can, in a quicker and cheaper way, develop unique, novel proteins, ingredients, and foods that will be able to address specific medical or nutritional needs. But to F's point, that also is pretty early days. I mean, one of the big ahas that I've had moving into this space is that not only do we not really understand the microbe of the soil, but we don't really understand down to an individual perspective, if we were all to eat a Krispy Kreme donut, what the impact would be on each one of our bodies. So Seana might have no problem whatsoever. I might keel over sick. And yet, so we talk about personalized medicine and personalized nutrition. We're just simply not there yet. And so what I'm excited about is that we are making some good progress. It is still early days. We can apply a lot of this new computational capability to identify new breakthroughs. So, you can even look at, COVID and the breakthroughs we're having on science because we're using cool computational capabilities.
Okay.
I think one interesting thing to me is, this is the only event I've ever been involved in that really talks about or that has a healthcare or is a healthcare event and brings in the ag part. Now, here and there you hear a little bit about food RX or prescription eating and stuff like that, but there's very, very little that connects those two. And so I think, how do we understand from the medical community or the health community what they need, what types of data points we could provide to them, like what's important for them moving forward. So that type of information is going to be, I think, critical, to move the industry forward.
Basically, nutritional sciences are way behind in terms of our grasp of what's really nutrition for people. It's way behind other biological sciences. So there is a lot more work that needs to be done in nutrition sciences.
I will say, if I can, go ahead, F. Well, I just have a very quick point, if you don't mind. Aaron, to your point, there has been some good work looking at, for instance, the relationship between the soil microbiome and the gut microbiome. And it's cool if you talk to the Stanford microbiome folks, they actually use soil testing, DNA testing technologies. And I know, for instance, the Soil Health Institute had an interesting event last year with folks like Bayer and Syngenta supporting that exploration of the relationship between healthy soils and the nutritional value that's in those foods. And I'll just make a plug for a good book called Pharmacology with an F on the front that looks into that topic of how the soil that food is grown in is related to the nutritional value of that food.
And that's super important, Rob. And I'm glad you brought that up because, that's really zeroing in on a key point. In fact, our molecular diagnostic test company is actually working on a soil chip right now for Eurofin, which is the largest global lab group that supports the ag and food industry. So Rob is spot on. I mean, that is really the next great frontier in a lot of ways. The first step is being able to do high-speed testing, be able to understand what you're working with, and then go from there. But I wanted to comment a little bit more on something you were saying earlier, Aaron, in regard to, the food companies and how they view this. So, at Myco, I'm on the board with Kellogg's, Tyson, Bunge, Ajinomoto, and many other global food companies. And I can tell you that their interest level in understanding these food profiles is far more advanced than we like to think. I think, a lot of times we, on the theoretical side, we like to throw these folks under the bus, so to speak. But they are very, very interested in this. And to give you an idea, just looking at the protein profile alone, at both the amino acid level, the vitamin levels, and so on, as they bring proteins into their formulations, the average cycle time to bring a new formulated product into the global, CPG market is 3 to 5 years at the big guys, and even in the smaller companies, 18 to 24 months. So you've got to remember, the impacts we're talking about today really ripple. Just to give you an idea, to get a major protein source into the global supply chain took our folks at Myco 3 or 4 years, right? So, you're really talking about a situation where what we're doing today is going to ripple downstream. So to Rob's point earlier, when we start thinking about things like the soil aspect, when we start thinking about things like the middle of the supply chain, these are elements that 3 or 4 years from today are really going to be felt and impactful in the actual day-to-day world.
Okay.
I'll just throw in there, Roger, the biggest barrier that we have to the adoption of this technology, putting everything else aside, is consumer willingness to pay a premium for better food.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to give you the last word on that, Rob, since it looks like we're out of time. I want to thank you folks for being here for our roundtable. It's always fun. It's really interesting. I always feel like I have the best seat in the house. Loved it. We could talk about this for hours. But I'm not going to. Instead, we're going to hand this back to David and team. And I believe that there is a networking reception coming up right after this. All yours, Dave.
I think David may have stepped away from his computer.
He's never away from his computer.
He's multitasking.
Thank you.
He sends email at 4 in the morning.
You guys did an amazing job. So I want to invite everybody to give Roger a big round of applause.